My name is Claire. I am 38 years old, and I work as the Chief Data Governance Officer for a massive regional healthcare network. My entire profession is dedicated to the absolute integrity, preservation, and auditing of permanent records. I spend my days ensuring that medical histories are perfectly logged, that every digital signature is time-stamped, and that the timeline of a patient's life is completely undeniable. In data governance, you learn a fundamental, inescapable truth about human history. An empty field is just as legally binding as a filled one. You cannot suddenly populate a 12-year gap in a database and expect the system to validate it. So, when I opened my front door on a rainy Tuesday evening and found a private process server standing on my porch, holding a thick stack of legal documents demanding I surrender custody of the 12-year-old girl sitting in my living room, I did not burst into tears. I did not scream. I did not fall to my knees in terror. I took the envelope, signed the receipt with a steady hand, and walked into my kitchen. I opened the packet. It was a formal petition for full legal and physical custody, filed by my biological sister, Morgan. Morgan, who had not seen, spoken to, or provided a single dime for her daughter in exactly 12 years. Morgan, who had suddenly resurfaced, dripping in newly acquired wealth, demanding that I hand over the child she had discarded like a heavy piece of luggage. She believed that because she shared biological DNA with my daughter, the court would simply erase the last decade of my life and hand her the ultimate prize. She believed she could rewrite history. She did not know that she had just challenged a woman who kept the receipts for a living. Welcome back to Family Drama Files, where we tell quiet, true-to-life stories about deep betrayal, methodical justice, and the exact moment someone stops shrinking to accommodate the toxic, cowardly people in their lives. If you have ever stepped up to raise a child that was not biologically yours, or if you have ever had to deploy a titanium boundary against an entitled, narcissistic family member, this story is for you. Drop a comment below to let me know where you are listening from, and be sure to subscribe. To understand the absolute, staggering audacity of Morgan's lawsuit, you have to understand the night she abandoned her child, and the agonizing, beautiful, terrifying journey it took for me to become a mother. I was 26 years old when it happened. I was single, working 60 hours a week as a junior data analyst, living in a modest, one-bedroom apartment in the city. My younger sister, Morgan, was 22. Morgan was the physical opposite of me, and the golden child of our dysfunctional family. She was stunningly beautiful, fiercely charismatic, and possessed a deeply entrenched, narcissistic belief that the world existed solely to entertain her. She viewed responsibilities as suggestions, and she viewed other people as stepping stones. When Morgan accidentally got pregnant at 21 by a man whose last name she barely knew, my parents enabled her entirely. They paid her rent, they bought the baby clothes, and they constantly excused her erratic behavior. "She is just young, Claire," my mother would sigh, ignoring the fact that Morgan was leaving her newborn baby with our aging parents every single weekend to go to nightclubs. When my parents tragically passed away in a car accident just 4 months after the baby, Lily, was born, the safety net vanished. Morgan was left alone with a 4-month-old infant, an expiring lease, and absolutely zero maternal instinct. It happened on a freezing Friday night in November. I was sitting at my small dining table, reviewing spreadsheets, when there was a frantic, aggressive pounding on my apartment door. I opened it to find Morgan standing in the hallway. She was wearing a skin-tight sequin dress and a heavy winter coat. She was holding a cheap, plastic diaper bag in one hand and carrying 6-month-old Lily in an infant car seat in the other. "I need a weekend, Claire," Morgan said, pushing past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. She dropped the car seat onto my living room rug. Lily was crying softly, her cheeks flushed, wearing a damp onesie. "Morgan, what are you doing?" I asked, completely shocked. "I have to work this weekend. I do not have a crib. I do not know how to take care of a baby." "Figure it out," Morgan snapped, checking her reflection in the mirror by the door. "I am losing my mind. I am exhausted. My friend invited me on a trip to Miami. It is completely paid for. I just need 3 days to clear my head. I will be back on Monday morning to get her." Before I could even process the absolute insanity of her demand, Morgan turned around, walked out the door, and disappeared down the hallway. She did not come back on Monday. She did not come back on Tuesday. By Wednesday, I was absolutely panicked. I had called out of work, spending 3 days desperately trying to soothe a crying, terrified infant. I had run out to buy formula, diapers, and a cheap bassinet. I called Morgan's cell phone 50 times. Every single call went straight to voicemail. On Thursday morning, I received a single text message from an international number. I met someone in Miami. We flew to Dubai. I cannot do the mom thing right now, Claire. It is ruining my mental health. Keep Lily for a while. I will send money when I get settled. I dropped my phone onto the kitchen counter. I looked down at the tiny, fragile 6-month-old baby girl sleeping in the bassinet. She had a small shock of dark hair and my grandmother's nose. She was completely, entirely abandoned. I did not receive a single dollar from Morgan. Over the next few weeks, I had to completely restructure my entire existence. I broke the lease on my one-bedroom apartment and moved into a slightly larger, cheaper place further away from the city center. I hired an affordable, in-home daycare provider so I could return to my demanding corporate job. I learned how to mix formula at 2 o'clock in the morning. I learned how to soothe colic. I learned how to be a mother, entirely by accident, entirely in the dark. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2 years. Morgan became a ghost. I would occasionally see photos of her on social media, tagging herself on yachts in Monaco, shopping in Paris, and attending elite parties in London. She never asked about Lily. She never sent a birthday card. She never sent a single dime of child support. When Lily turned 3, I realized I needed legal protection. I could not put her on my corporate health insurance, and I could not legally enroll her in preschool without a guardianship order. I hired a family law attorney. We filed for an emergency kinship guardianship. The court attempted to serve Morgan with the paperwork at her last known address and sent notices to her email. She ignored every single one. Because she failed to appear or contest the petition, the family court judge looked at my impeccable employment record, looked at the clean, safe home I had built, and granted me full, permanent legal and physical guardianship of Lily. I was her mother in every single way that mattered. The years blurred together into a beautiful, exhausting, deeply rewarding life. I rose through the ranks at the healthcare network, eventually becoming the chief data governance officer. I bought a house in a beautiful suburban neighborhood with excellent schools. Lily grew into a brilliant, fiercely intelligent, wildly compassionate 12-year-old girl. She played the cello. She loved building robotics kits. She had a laugh that could light up a completely dark room. She knew she was adopted by me, and she knew I was her aunt biologically, but she called me Mom. We were a unit. We were a fortress. And then, exactly 12 years after she dropped that car seat on my rug, the ghost returned. It was a Saturday afternoon in early September. Lily was in the backyard, reading a book on the patio. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel of my driveway. I looked out the kitchen window. A massive, pristine, white luxury sports utility vehicle had parked in front of my house. The driver's side door opened. Out stepped a woman wearing a tailored cashmere coat, oversized designer sunglasses, and carrying a leather handbag that cost more than my first car. It was Morgan. She looked older, perfectly polished, and entirely out of place in my quiet suburban neighborhood. She walked up the front steps and rang the doorbell. I froze. A wave of absolute, primal terror washed over me. The monster who had abandoned my child was standing on my porch. I wiped my hands on a towel. I walked to the front door. I did not open it wide. I opened it just enough to block the threshold with my body. Morgan pulled down her sunglasses, offering a brilliant, terrifyingly confident smile. "Hello, Claire," Morgan said, her voice smooth and dripping with artificial warmth. "It has been a long time. I missed you." "What are you doing here, Morgan?" I asked, my voice as cold and hard as granite. "I am back in the States," Morgan announced, gesturing vaguely to her luxury vehicle. "I got married, Claire. His name is Richard. He is an incredible man, a real estate developer. We just bought a massive house in the wealthy district across town. And now that I am finally settled, and my mental health is completely healed, I am here to see my little girl. I want to bring her home." The sheer, staggering delusion of her sentence made my blood run entirely cold. "You do not have a little girl, Morgan," I said quietly, gripping the edge of the door. "You left a biological byproduct on my rug 12 years ago and fled the continent. The girl who lives in this house is my daughter." Morgan's fake smile faltered, her eyes narrowing into cruel, familiar slits. "Do not be dramatic, Claire. I had severe postpartum depression. I had to go away to heal, but I am better now. Richard and I want to complete our family. I am her biological mother. You were just watching her for me. I am her legal guardian, I corrected her, refusing to step aside. I have full court-ordered custody. You have no rights to her. You are a stranger. You will not disrupt her life to play house for your new husband. Get off my porch. I slammed the door in her face. I locked the deadbolt. I watched through the peephole as Morgan stood on the porch, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She pulled out her cell phone, typed furiously, and stomped back to her luxury vehicle. 3 days later, the private process server arrived with the massive legal packet. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the petition for custody. Morgan had not hired a standard local lawyer. She had hired the most ruthless, expensive, high-powered family law firm in the entire state. The petition was a masterclass in aggressive legal fiction. It claimed that Morgan had suffered from debilitating, medically documented postpartum psychosis that forced her to seek treatment abroad. It claimed that she had sent thousands of dollars in child support over the years, and that I had maliciously intercepted the funds and hidden them. It claimed that I had changed my phone number and moved specifically to alienate her from her child. She was painting me as a bitter, jealous, barren aunt who had kidnapped her baby while she was sick. And she was demanding the immediate termination of my guardianship and the full return of physical custody to her and her wealthy new husband. I looked at the legal papers. I did not cry. When a hostile entity attempts to corrupt a protected database, you do not panic. You initiate a full-scale forensic audit. Morgan thought she was walking into a courtroom with a billionaire's checkbook and a tragic, victimized narrative. She thought she could bury me in expensive litigation. She was about to find out exactly what happens when you challenge a chief data governance officer to a paperwork war. I did not hire the most expensive family law firm in the state. I did not need a team of aggressive, theatrical litigators to fight my battle. When you hold the absolute, undeniable truth, you only need one incredibly meticulous attorney who knows how to present the data without emotion. I hired Evelyn, a senior partner at a boutique firm specializing in complex custody litigation and asset tracing. Evelyn was a woman who wore pristine gray suits, spoke in a slow, terrifyingly calm drawl, and built her cases entirely on forensic documentation. I sat in Evelyn's glass-walled office, overlooking the city, and dropped the massive petition Morgan had filed onto her desk. She is claiming severe, medically documented postpartum psychosis that required 12 years of treatment abroad, I told Evelyn, sliding a second, much thicker binder across the desk. She is also claiming she sent thousands of dollars in child support, which she alleges I maliciously intercepted and hid. Evelyn opened my binder. She raised an elegant, perfectly arched eyebrow. And I presume, Claire, that this binder contains the proof that her narrative is entirely fictional. This binder contains a flawless, unbroken chain of custody for the last 12 years of my life, I confirmed, tapping the cover. I am the Chief Data Governance Officer for the largest healthcare network in this region. I do not throw away a single receipt, a single email, or a single medical record. Every dollar I have ever spent on Lily, every pediatrician copay, every cello lesson, every grocery receipt for formula from 12 years ago is categorized, indexed, and cross-referenced with my corresponding bank statements. Evelyn flipped to the first tab. I had provided an exhaustive financial audit. I had pulled 12 years of certified bank records for every account bearing my name. If Morgan claims she sent child support, she will have to provide the routing numbers of the receiving accounts, I explained. And when she inevitably produces forged wire transfer receipts, we will subpoena her husband's financial records to prove the funds never left their possession. But the financial fraud is not the weakest point in her petition, Evelyn. The weakest point is the medical claim. Evelyn looked up, her interest deeply piqued. The postpartum psychosis? Yes, I nodded. Morgan claims she was receiving intensive psychiatric treatment in Europe and Dubai. But Morgan is a narcissist who cannot survive without an audience. For the last 12 years, while she was supposedly hospitalized in psychiatric facilities, she was actively documenting her entire life on social media. I flipped to the third tab in the binder. I had not just taken screenshots of Morgan's social media. I had utilized a specialized, legal-grade archival software to capture the metadata, the timestamps, and the geolocation tags of every single public post she had made over the last decade. Page 42, I instructed. Exactly 8 months after she abandoned Lily on my rug, she was not in a psychiatric hospital. She was attending a high-society yacht party in Monaco. The geolocation metadata confirms her presence on the vessel. Page 56. 3 years later, she was skiing in the Swiss Alps, boasting about her new designer wardrobe. I have archived 412 public posts, proving a continuous, uninterrupted lifestyle of luxury travel and extreme wealth, with absolutely zero gaps that would indicate hospitalization. Evelyn let out a low, dark chuckle. It was the sound of a predator recognizing a perfectly cornered prey. "This is spectacular, Claire," Evelyn drawled, closing the binder. "She is walking into family court and committing aggressive, documented perjury on her initial filing. But we must be careful. Family court judges strongly favor biological reunification, even when the biological parent is deeply flawed. Her new husband's wealth will make her look incredibly stable on paper. We need to know why she suddenly wants the child back now, after 12 years of silence. Narcissists do not suddenly develop maternal instincts. They develop a need for an accessory. I am already running a background check on the new husband, Richard," I said smoothly. "I will have the motive isolated by the end of the week." I left Evelyn's office and drove home. I sat down at the kitchen table with Lily. She was 12 years old, brilliant, and incredibly perceptive. I did not believe in lying to my daughter to protect her. I believed in giving her the age-appropriate truth so she could protect herself. "Lily," I said gently, holding her hands across the table, "I need to tell you something very important. The woman who came to the door on Saturday, that was Morgan, your biological mother." Lily's eyes widened slightly. She did not look excited. She looked deeply uncomfortable. "The one who left?" "Yes," I confirmed. "She has returned to the United States. She got married to a wealthy man and she has hired lawyers. She is trying to convince a judge to let her take you to live with her." Lily pulled her hands out of mine. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, visceral panic. "No, Mom, you cannot let her take me. I do not know her. I do not want to live with a stranger." "Look at me, Lily," I commanded softly, ensuring she saw the absolute, unyielding certainty in my eyes. "I am your mother. I have fought for you since the day you were 6 months old. I will sell this house. I will empty every bank account I have, and I will tear down the entire judicial system before I let anyone take you out of this home. Do you understand me? You are safe." Lily let out a shaky breath, tears spilling over her eyelashes, and threw her arms around my neck. I held her fiercely, staring over her shoulder at the wall, feeling a level of protective rage that could have powered a small city. The next evening, my friend Rachel, a senior forensic accountant who owed me several favors, delivered the background check on Morgan's new husband, Richard. I sat in my home office, reading the confidential dossier Rachel had compiled. As I connected the data points, the entire, sickening motive behind Morgan's sudden maternal resurgence became blindingly clear. Richard was 55 years old, 20 years older than Morgan. He was a massive commercial real estate developer who dealt exclusively in high-end, family-oriented suburban developments. His entire corporate brand was built around the concept of family first. He sponsored little league teams, he donated to local pediatric wings, and he utilized his image as a devoted family man to secure lucrative municipal contracts. However, Richard had a massive, glaring vulnerability in his pristine public image. He had been divorced 3 times, and he had no children of his own. Recently, Richard had launched a massive campaign to secure the development rights for a multi-million-dollar community center project funded by the city council. The city council was notoriously conservative, favoring developers who presented a strong, traditional family image. According to Rachel's audit of public relations filings, Richard had recently hired an elite crisis management firm to overhaul his public image leading up to the council vote. I connected the final dots. Morgan had secured a billionaire husband. But to keep him, and to ensure he secured the massive city contract that funded their lavish lifestyle, she needed to play the role of the devoted, traditional wife. A wife with a family, a wife with a child. She did not want a daughter. She wanted a human prop. She wanted to parade Lily around at charity galas and city council meetings to legitimize her husband's brand. I closed the dossier. The cold, mechanical part of my brain took over entirely. Morgan wanted to use my daughter as a PR strategy. I was going to use Morgan's PR strategy to completely annihilate her. The mandatory family court mediation session was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In family court, before a judge will hear a contested custody battle, the parties are required to sit in a room with a neutral mediator to attempt to reach a settlement. It is designed to save court time. It is usually a tense, emotional nightmare. I arrived at the courthouse wearing a tailored navy blue suit. Evelyn walked beside me, carrying 2 heavy, black leather briefcases. We were escorted into a stark, windowless conference room with a long wooden table. Sitting on the opposite side of the table was Morgan. She was dressed meticulously for the part of the tragic, rehabilitated mother. She wore a modest, pale pink dress, minimal makeup, and held a tissue in her hand. Sitting next to her was her husband, Richard, a silver-haired, imposing man wearing a bespoke suit, and their lead attorney, a slick, aggressive litigator named Davis. "Good morning," the neutral mediator said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "We are here to discuss the petition to terminate the guardianship of Lily, currently held by Claire, and restore physical custody to the biological mother, Morgan." Davis, Morgan's aggressive lawyer, immediately took control of the room. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of deep, patronizing sympathy. "Mr. Mediator," Davis began smoothly, "this is a tragic case of a family divided by severe illness. 12 years ago, my client, Morgan, suffered a catastrophic psychological break, severe postpartum psychosis. She was forced to seek highly specialized, long-term psychiatric care in Europe. During her tragic absence, her sister, Claire, stepped in as a temporary guardian. But instead of supporting Morgan's recovery, Claire maliciously changed her phone number, moved to a new city, and systematically alienated Morgan from her child." Morgan dabbed her eyes with the tissue, letting out a perfectly timed, soft sob. Richard placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, playing the role of the supportive patriarch. "Now," Davis continued, his voice rising in volume, "Morgan is completely rehabilitated. She is happily married to a highly respected community leader. They have purchased a beautiful home in the best school district in the state. They have the financial resources to provide Lily with a life Claire simply cannot afford. We are politely requesting that Claire voluntarily surrender custody today to avoid dragging this child through a traumatic public trial." The mediator turned to look at me and Evelyn. Evelyn did not speak immediately. She slowly unlatched the brass locks on her first heavy black briefcase. "Mr. Davis," Evelyn drawled, her voice quiet but carrying the lethal precision of a sniper rifle. "Before we discuss surrendering the child, we have a few procedural questions regarding your client's initial filing under penalty of perjury." Evelyn pulled out the first bound dossier and slid it across the wooden table toward the mediator. "The petition claims Morgan was receiving intensive, inpatient psychiatric care in Europe for 12 years, Evelyn stated, opening her own copy of the file. "If you turn to tab 3, Mr. Mediator, you will find 412 time-stamped, geolocated photographs publicly posted by Morgan herself during those 12 years. Davis frowned, leaning over to look at the binder. Morgan's fake sobbing abruptly stopped. Page 42, Evelyn narrated relentlessly. Morgan attending a champagne yacht party in Monaco, 8 months after abandoning the infant. Page 56, Morgan skiing in the Swiss Alps. Page 112, Morgan attending a high-stakes poker tournament in Macau. Unless the European psychiatric facilities have significantly upgraded their recreational therapy programs, these photographs demonstrate a continuous, luxurious lifestyle completely devoid of medical confinement. Richard, the wealthy husband, stiffened. He looked at the photographs of his wife partying on yachts, and then he looked at Morgan. "Morgan, you told me you were in a clinic in Zurich." Morgan's face flushed a deep, panicked red. They let me out for day trips. It was part of my integration therapy. Day trips to Macau? Evelyn asked dryly. Evelyn reached into the briefcase again. She pulled out a second, much thicker binder. The petition also claims that Morgan sent thousands of dollars in child support, which Claire allegedly intercepted and hid. Evelyn continued, sliding the second binder across the table. This binder contains 12 years of certified, unbroken financial audits for every single bank account associated with Claire. There is not a single deposit, wire transfer, or foreign remittance from Morgan, Richard, or any affiliated shell company. Evelyn locked eyes with Davis, the aggressive lawyer. "Mr. Davis," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You filed a petition in family court alleging financial theft and medical incapacitation. We have absolute, metadata-verified proof that your client committed aggressive perjury on a sworn legal document to extort custody of a minor child. If you proceed with this trial, I will submit this dossier to the judge, and I will request that your client be investigated for perjury and filing a frivolous, malicious lawsuit. Davis stared at the binders. The slick, aggressive litigator realized in a fraction of a second that his client had lied to him, and he had just walked into a forensic ambush. He looked at Morgan with pure, undisguised fury. But I was not finished. I had dismantled Morgan's legal argument. Now it was time to destroy her motive. "Richard," I said quietly, speaking directly to the wealthy husband. Richard looked up at me. He was a businessman who understood leverage, and he recognized immediately that the power in the room had entirely shifted to my side of the table. "Morgan does not want to be a mother, Richard," I said, my voice completely steady. "She abandoned Lily on my rug when she was a baby because it was ruining her weekend plans. She did not contact her for 12 years. Do you want to know why she suddenly showed up on my porch last week?" "Claire, shut up," Morgan shrieked, slamming her hands onto the table, abandoning the victim act entirely. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, desperate rage. "Do not listen to her, Richard. She is jealous of our wealth." I ignored her completely. I kept my eyes locked on Richard. "She showed up," I told him, "because you hired an elite crisis management PR firm 3 weeks ago. You are trying to secure the multi-million-dollar municipal contract for the new community center. The city council demands a developer with a strong, traditional family image. You have 3 divorces and no children. Morgan knew she was losing her value as a trophy wife, so she decided to come retrieve the human prop she left at my house to legitimize your brand." Richard's face drained of all color. He looked at the woman sitting next to him. "Morgan," Richard asked, his voice low and incredibly dangerous, "you told me your sister kidnapped your baby while you were sick. You told me you spent 10 years trying to track her down." "She is lying," Morgan screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Richard, she fabricated all of this. She is a data analyst. She hacked the internet to make fake photos. The metadata is certified by an independent digital forensics firm, Richard," Evelyn interjected smoothly, handing him a sealed certificate of authenticity. "It will hold up in any federal court. Your wife lied to you to secure your marriage, and she lied to the court to secure a PR prop." Richard stood up. He did not look at Morgan. He looked directly at Davis, his attorney. "Davis," Richard commanded, his voice echoing in the small conference room with absolute authority. "Withdraw the petition. Withdraw my name from all legal filings associated with this woman immediately. I will not have my corporate reputation tied to a perjury investigation." "Richard, please," Morgan sobbed, reaching out to grab his expensive suit jacket. "You cannot leave me. I am your wife." Richard slapped her hand away as if she had burned him. "You are a liability," he said coldly. He picked up his briefcase, turned his back on the woman he had married, and walked out of the conference room. Davis, eager to escape the sinking ship, packed his legal pads into his bag and rushed out right behind his client. Morgan was left sitting alone on her side of the heavy wooden table. The billionaire husband, the aggressive lawyer, and the entire fabricated narrative had vanished in less than 20 minutes. She looked across the table at me. The hatred in her eyes was toxic, primal, and completely unhinged. "You ruined my life," Morgan hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You ruined my marriage. I will never forgive you for this." I stood up. I looked down at the woman who had abandoned a crying infant, partied on yachts for a decade, and returned only to use that child as a stepping stone to secure a wealthy man. "You ruined your own life, Morgan," I said, my voice completely devoid of pity. "You just forgot that you left your daughter with a woman who audits history for a living. The database is closed. You do not get to rewrite the record." I picked up my briefcase, turned my back on the ghost of my sister, and walked out of the courthouse. I stepped into the brilliant, cold afternoon sunlight. The air tasted incredibly clean. In my profession, there is a profound sense of satisfaction that comes from completing a massive, complex data audit. When you finally isolate the corrupted file, document its path of destruction, and permanently delete it from the mainframe, the entire system runs flawlessly. I had just deleted Morgan from my daughter's life. Permanently. Evelyn walked beside me, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete steps. She did not smile, but her eyes held the dark, victorious gleam of a litigator who had just executed a flawless ambush. "Well," Evelyn drawled smoothly, adjusting the collar of her pristine gray suit, I believe that was the shortest mediation session of my entire career. Richard is currently speed dialing his corporate divorce attorneys, and Davis is likely drafting a letter to formally withdraw himself as Morgan's counsel to avoid the perjury blowback. What happens to the custody petition? I asked, keeping my focus on the legal logistics. Without Richard's funding to pay her legal fees, and without Davis to represent her, Morgan's petition is effectively dead, Evelyn explained. However, we are not going to simply wait for it to expire. Tomorrow morning, I am filing a motion to dismiss with prejudice, submitting the forensic metadata binder directly to the judge. I am also filing a formal request for a permanent restraining order against Morgan, citing documented harassment, attempted extortion, and severe emotional distress inflicted upon a minor. Will the judge grant the restraining order based on a mediation disaster? I asked. The judge will grant it based on the documented perjury and her demonstrated instability, Evelyn assured me. By the time I am finished drafting the motion, Morgan will not be legally permitted to come within 1,000 feet of your daughter, your house, or your place of employment. I nodded. File it. I drove home. When I pulled into my driveway, the massive, pristine white luxury sports utility vehicle was gone. The quiet, peaceful suburban atmosphere of my neighborhood had returned. I unlocked the front door and walked into the kitchen. Lily was sitting at the kitchen island, hunched over her homework, her shoulders incredibly tense. When she heard the door close, she spun around, her eyes wide with terror. I dropped my briefcase on the floor. I walked over to my daughter, pulled out the bar stool next to her, and sat down. It is over, Lily, I said, my voice steady, warm, and brimming with absolute certainty. Lily let out a sharp, shuddering breath. She is not going to take me. She is never going to take you, I promised, taking both of her hands in mine. She tried to tell the lawyers a story, but I brought the receipts. Her husband realized she was lying, and he left. Her lawyer realized she was lying, and he quit. The judge is going to throw her lawsuit in the garbage, and we are getting a piece of paper that says she is never allowed to come to our house again. Lily stared at me for a long moment, processing the absolute safety of my words. The tension drained out of her young shoulders, and she threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder, crying quiet tears of sheer, unadulterated relief. I held her tightly, resting my chin on the top of her head. I told you, Lily, I am your mother. You are safe. You are always going to be safe. The aftermath of the courthouse ambush was a masterclass in catastrophic, self-inflicted ruin. In data governance, when a fraudulent entry is exposed in a public ledger, it does not just fail a single audit. It corrupts the credibility of the entire user. Morgan's credibility was annihilated across every single sector of her life. Richard, terrified of the public relations nightmare that would ensue if the city council discovered his new wife had committed perjury in family court, acted with the ruthless speed of a corporate developer protecting his brand. He filed for divorce the very next morning. Because Morgan had signed a prenuptial agreement when they married, and because the marriage had lasted less than a year, she was entitled to virtually nothing. Richard's lawyers forced her to vacate the massive house in the wealthy district within 48 hours. He stripped her of the luxury sports utility vehicle, the platinum credit cards, and the lavish allowance she had relied upon to fund her designer lifestyle. Morgan was left with exactly what she brought into the marriage: a suitcase full of clothes and a profound, pathological inability to take responsibility for her own actions. Desperate for cash, Morgan attempted to crawl back to the network of wealthy, elite friends she had cultivated during her 12 years of partying in Europe and Dubai. But the elite social circle is incredibly small and incredibly gossipy. Word of her disastrous family court appearance, her perjury, and her swift divorce from Richard traveled across the Atlantic faster than a private jet. When your entire social currency is built on the illusion of carefree wealth and mysterious glamour, being exposed as a broke, perjuring mother who abandoned her child is a fatal social disease. Her friends stopped returning her calls. The invitations to yachts in Monaco evaporated. Morgan was thoroughly bankrupt, both financially and socially. Meanwhile, Evelyn executed the final legal maneuver with flawless precision. Evelyn submitted the forensic metadata binder directly to the presiding family court judge, alongside the motion to dismiss with prejudice. When the judge reviewed the 412 time-stamped photographs proving Morgan's luxurious, 12-year vacation, contrasted against the sworn legal petition claiming she was incapacitated in a psychiatric hospital. The judge was absolutely furious. The judge dismissed Morgan's custody petition immediately, citing gross perjury and a malicious abuse of the judicial system. Furthermore, the judge granted the permanent restraining order without hesitation. Morgan was legally barred from contacting Lily, contacting me, or coming within 1,000 feet of our home, Lily's school, or my place of employment. If Morgan violated the order, she would be arrested immediately. Because Morgan had no lawyer, no money, and no defense, she did not even attempt to contest the restraining order. She simply vanished into the background, exactly as she had 12 years prior. Last I heard through the convoluted grapevine of our extended family, Morgan had moved into a cheap, rented apartment in a different state, working as a hostess at a mid-tier restaurant, desperately trying to manipulate a new group of friends who did not know her history. The glamorous, billionaire-adjacent lifestyle she had destroyed her family to maintain was permanently gone. As for me, and for Lily, we thrived. Without the looming threat of the ghost from the past, our lives settled back into a beautiful, productive rhythm. I was promoted to the vice president of data governance at my healthcare network, managing a massive department and securing a significant increase in my salary. I used a portion of my new income to set up a comprehensive, ironclad trust fund for Lily. I ensured that her college tuition, her future housing, and her financial security were permanently protected from any external interference. I built a legal fortress around my daughter that no opportunistic relative could ever breach. Lily flourished. She joined the advanced robotics team at her middle school. She continued to play the cello, eventually securing a spot in the regional youth symphony. She grew into a confident, empathetic, fiercely intelligent young woman who knew exactly what she was worth and exactly who her mother was. People who hear the story of the courthouse ambush often ask me how I managed to keep my composure. They ask how I did not simply lose my mind when I received that custody petition, how I did not scream at Morgan when she stood on my porch demanding her human prop back. I tell them the exact same thing I tell my junior data analysts on their first day of training. When you discover a massive, catastrophic threat to your database, panic is the enemy of preservation. Hysteria blinds you to the leverage you possess. If you scream, you lose precious time. If you cry, you obscure the data. When a toxic entity attempts to rewrite history to steal your most valuable asset, you do not waste time arguing with them about their morality. You do not negotiate with people who abandon their responsibilities and demand the rewards. You look at the logistics, you pull the metadata, and you deploy a level of documented truth so devastating, so legally insurmountable, that they never, ever attempt to corrupt your records again. Morgan thought I was just a quiet, boring older sister who would be paralyzed by the threat of expensive lawyers and a billionaire husband. She thought her glamorous aesthetic elevated her above the laws of reality. She forgot that reality always wins, especially when you are standing in a courtroom and someone else is holding the receipts. I did not just stop a custody battle. I audited my family, identified the hostile threat, and systematically liquidated her from my daughter's future. That is my story. If you are listening to this, and you are currently dealing with an entitled relative who attempts to overwrite your authority as a parent, a narcissist who uses children as props, or a ghost from the past who demands the rewards of the work you did, do not cry. Do not beg them to respect you. Just secure your documents. Build your fortress. Learn the rules of the game better than they do, and wait for them to make the fatal mistake of stepping into your jurisdiction. If you have ever had to deploy absolute, unyielding boundaries to protect a child you stepped up to raise, or if you believe in the undeniable, terrifying power of a forensic metadata audit, type the word archived in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for tuning in to Family Drama Files. Remember, your authority as a parent is earned through action, not biology, and your peace is a premium asset. Protect it fiercely. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.